This current map displays the boundaries between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But the United States wasn't nearly as big as it is now in 1840. Mexicans formerly inhabited what are now known as California, Texas, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and portions of Colorado. However, the United States took all of these states from Mexico in 1848. Yes, this was one of the USA's most nefarious and egregious steals from Mexico. The natural resources in these Mexican territories were among the best on the entire American continent. Just to give you an idea, California's economy would rank 5th in the world if it were a sovereign nation today. Additionally, Texas' economy would rank as the 10th largest in the world if it were a sovereign state. California and Texas have helped make the United States into the superpower it is today. The American dream began in California, where the biggest firms in the world were founded and where the technologies that altered the globe were developed. In a similar vein, Texas served as the world's oil capital and fed the insatiable desire for this black treasure. Additionally, with a gross domestic product of more than $6.5 trillion, more than 6 times the size of Mexico's economy, if all of these states were independent, they would have the 3rd largest economy in the world. But how did the US take California from Mexico, I wonder? The answer to this query leads us to a bleak period in human history marked by treachery, brutality, and prejudice. We're going to inform you about it in this video. Christopher Columbus first set foot on the area that is now known as America in 1492. Additionally, the most significant dynasties in Europe conquered and colonized this continent despite the fact that it was home to sophisticated civilizations like the Inca and the Aztec. The eastern region of what is now the United States was colonized by the British Empire in North America. 13 British Empire provinces made the decision to secede from the British Empire in 1776, founding the nation that is now known as the United States of America as their populations and economic sophistication increased. One of the biggest nations in the world and the present superpower, the United States has managed to double in size by more than 10 since its founding. Since its inception, the United States has gradually moved westward from eastern North America. The idea of conquering the American West was widely held. However, it had a very turbulent expansion process, particularly when it collided with Mexico. As I showed you earlier, between the 1830s and 1840s, this is what North America looked like. The United States had bought all this area from France and conquered the other territories. Mexico, on the other side of the border, had all of California and Texas. However, the lack of population in this area was the main issue. This region was home to a few Native American tribes and primarily Jesuit missionaries, which explains why towns in those states, such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego, bear Catholic names. And the Mexican government opened the borders, allowing the Anglo-Americans to settle there. On one condition, the Mexican government opened the doors and allowed them to rent land and cultivate it. The Anglo-Americans were subject to the requirement that they assimilate into Mexico by converting to Catholicism, learning Spanish, and embracing Mexican values. The outcome was not really as expected. Although thousands of Americans immigrated to what is now Texas, they barely assimilated into Mexican culture. This region had developed into a miniature version of the United States, and they had even imported slaves, which was against Mexican law. A few years later, the Mexican government decided to send troops to restore order after realizing this. The Mexican central government found it increasingly challenging to control the situation in the north due to the ongoing disputes between the American settlers in Texas. The Republic of Texas was established in 1836 as a sovereign state that was independent of both the United States and Mexico after the legendary battles of San Jacinto and the Alamo, where the Texans beat the Mexican army. As I previously stated, a combination of native Texans, Native Americans, and newly arrived Anglo-Americans made up the majority of the population of this nascent Republic of Texas. I'm aware that many will wonder why Texas is getting so much attention rather than California, but this section of the narrative is crucial to understanding how the United States deceitfully acquired this area from Mexico. The newly formed Republic of Texas did not exist for very long. The Republic was a territory in dispute with Mexico when the United States admitted it as a new state in 1845. The new state of Texas was claimed by the United States, but the Mexican authorities maintained that this land was still under Mexican control. James Polk served as the President of the United States during the time. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. James Polk envisioned the United States extending its dominion to include California and the entire Pacific coast. And even though Texas was successfully taken from Mexico by the United States, the entire region remained Mexican territory. However, not everyone shared James Polk's aim, and the northern and southern portions of the country were experiencing some very turbulent years. Nobody wished to engage in combat with Mexico. When a nation was embroiled in internal strife, wars were expensive, costly in terms of troop deaths, and ultimately pointless. James Polk attempted to purchase California and the states visible here from Mexico for $25 million as a result. The offer was definitely declined by the Mexican administration. James Polk came to the conclusion that going to war was his only option. But no one wished to provoke Mexico into war. He had to therefore come up with a reason to start a war with Mexico. He immediately dispatched army troops to the newly established US-Mexico border. Keep in mind that this entire border was disputed land. The Mexican government promptly dispatched hundreds of soldiers to guard the border after learning that these American soldiers had entered what was regarded as Mexican territory. A conflict erupted, some American soldiers perished in the fighting, and the remainder were taken prisoner. James Polk wanted exactly this, after all. Now James Polk could take advantage of the circumstance and deceive the American Congress by claiming that Mexico invaded the country and attacked American forces inside of what they claimed to be the new state of Texas. Do you understand how impure this action was? Because of the claimed invasion, the United States declared war on Mexico in 1846. The Mexican-American War is the name given to this conflict in history. For the goals of this man, a very bloody war in which more than 150,000 soldiers and civilians perished. James Polk achieved his goals. After defeating Mexico in a war in 1848, the United States offered to pay $15 million to purchase the entire region from California to the Texas region that is currently under dispute. Yes, $15 million bucks. This number is obviously a formality. Truth be told, the Mexican administration was forced to accept the proposal. The reality of this entire operation is that it was a heinous heist of the United States by Mexico. And because of that defeat, the United States gained a continental nation that stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, while Mexico lost more than a third of its whole territory to the United States. However, there is still one more, far more crucial detail. The United States could have seized control of the entire territory of Mexico if the Mexican government and army had been defeated. The senator also stated, in his own words, that the United States had never considered integrating any race other than white into the nation while this was being discussed by the American government. Would we be willing to identify with Mexico's indigenous and mestizo races as equals and fellow citizens? As a result, the U.S. government made the decision to solely annex the sparsely inhabited northern Mexican regions, where there were few Mexicans and Native American tribes. Naturally, it is also possible to imagine what happened to these individuals once the United States annexed them into its borders. The United States was created as a new country. The largest country in the Americas, this continent-spanning nation spanned from the Atlantic to the Pacific. These new American territories of California, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah were quickly settled by Americans. They constructed roads and railroads that connected the entire nation. And for this reason, I contend that Mexico gave the United States its land from California to Texas. You'll probably explain why I believe the United States stole from Mexico at this point. Well, if we go back to the beginning of this video, I explained that Texas was included in the Mexican borders reach during the 1830s. The Mexican government opened its doors to Anglo-Americans on the condition that they assimilate into Mexico and become Mexicans in order to populate and develop these territories. The Americans, however, did not assimilate. They conquered Texas and seized control of it from Mexico. Then, US President Polk sent his forces into area that was regarded as Mexican, which sparked a Mexican invasion. Mexico had to defend itself, of course, and the United States declared war on Mexico as a result. The irony and tragedy of this entire affair is that it stole the entire area in an oppressive manner. Mexico welcomed Americans with wide arms, but if we look at Mexican immigration to the US in recent decades, it was not. Most of the Mexicans who migrated to the United States had to do so illegally. Although there are various ways to condemn such immigration, the reality is that the United States needs them and that their labor is essential to the development of the nation. But it is regrettable that Mexicans are not treated as kindly as Americans were in Mexico more than a century ago. More than 37 million people in the United States are of Mexican heritage, and there are more than 65 million Hispanics in the country as a whole. And the majority of them reside in Texas and California, places that are primarily Hispanic. It is because of these Hispanics that the economy of these states is as strong as you see it today. And that leads me to ask you, what do you think would have happened if the states from Texas to California remained part of Mexico and not part of the United States? Leave us your opinion in the comments.